Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hey everyone, this is Group 7 video presentation. It's about sampling and inferential statistics. The group member of Group 7, they are Sri Nur Hamdani and Sri Yulianti B. Table of contents. First, sampling. Second, the strategy of inferential statistics. Third, the general strategy of statistical tests. First, sampling. We would like to explain about sampling. An important characteristic of inferential statistics is the process of going from the part to the whole. A population is defined as all members of any well-defined class of people, even or object. Sample is a portion of a population. Rationale of sampling. Sampling is indispensable to the researcher. Usually, the time, money, and effort involved do not permit a researcher to study all possible members of a population. Because the purpose of drawing a sample from a population is to obtain information concerning that population, it is extremely important that the individuals included in a sample constitute a representative cross-section of individuals in the population. Steps in sampling. The first step in sampling is the identification of the target population, the large group to which the researcher wishes to generalize the results of the study. Two major types of sampling procedures are available to researchers. First, probability, and second, non-probability sampling. Probability sampling. Probability sampling is defined as the kind of sampling in which every element in the population has an equal chance of being selected. The four types of probability sampling. First, sample random sampling. Second, stratified sampling. Third, cluster sampling mercury. Fourth, systematic sampling. Non-probability sampling. In many research institutions, the enumeration of the population elements, a basic requirement in probability sampling, is difficult, if not impossible. The lawful nature of sampling errors. Sampling errors of the mean, and the last, standard error of the mean. Random assignment. We distinguish random sampling from random assignment. Random assignment is a procedure used after we have a sample of participants and before we expose them to the treatment. The size of the sample, or fundamentals. The most important characteristics of a sample is its representativeness, not its size. A random sample of 200 is better than a random sample of 100. The concept of sampling error. When an inference is made from a sample to a population, a certain amount of error is involved because even random samples can be expected to vary from one to another. The second is the strategy of inferential statistics. The null hypothesis. The chance explanation is known as the null hypothesis, which is a statement that there is no actual relationship between the variables and that any observed relationship is only a function. All fourth graders taught by method B. In formula form, using the symbol M for population mean, the statement becomes Type 1 and Type 2 errors. The investigator will either retain or reject the null hypothesis. Either decision may be correct or wrong. The types of errors. Type 1 errors symbolized by a alpha. Type 2 errors symbolized by beta. Comparison of type 1 and type 2 errors, although there are certainly exceptions. Level of significance. The level of significance is the probability of a type 1 error that an investigator is willing to risk in rejecting a null hypothesis. The investigator is saying that he or she is willing to limit the probability of rejecting the null hypothesis when it is true type 1 error to 1 in 100.
Directional and non-directional tests. In testing a null hypothesis, researchers are not usually concerned with the direction of the differences. Rather, they are interested in knowing about the possible departure of sample statistics from population parameters. This kind of test is called non-directional. Determining the appropriate sample size. A scientific method of determining the sample size needed is to specify a meaningful effect size and then determine the sample size needed to reach the desired probability of rejecting the null hypothesis at the given level of significance. Next is power. Power is the ability to reject a null hypothesis when it is false. Next is part 3, the general strategy of statistical tests. The T test for independent samples. In our math concept example, the statistic is the difference between the mean of the group done by method B and the group done by method A. Okay, next you can see in the PowerPoint where and one number of case in group 1 and 2 number of case in group 2 and etc. Next is degrees of freedom. The number of degrees of freedom is the number of observation free to vary around a constant parameter. To illustrate the general concept of degrees of freedom, suppose a teacher asks a student to name any 5 numbers that come into his or her mind. The T distributions. For generations, researchers use the normal curve to assess the probability of an observation or change expectation ratio. The t-test for dependent samples. So far, our discussion has centered on comparing the means obtained from two independent samples. In an independent sample, each member is chosen randomly from the population and the composition of one group has no bearing. The t-test for person are correlation coefficients. Another important use for the t-test in the testing hypothesis concerning a population correlation rho. The most common null hypothesis in such case is that population correlation is zero. And then analysis of variance. Simple or one-way analysis of variance or ANOVA is a statistical procedure used to analyze the data from a study with more than two groups. Computing the ratio or simple analysis of variance. Next, the test of significance and effect size. Next, multifactor analysis of variance. In the complex world we live in, it often is not the case that an independent variable has a consistent influence on a dependent variable when the variable normal hearing versus deaf is taken into account. Interpreting the F ratios. The C-square test of significance. When dealing with nominal data, the most widely used tests of significance are the C-square test. They compare observed frequencies and expected frequency size. The one variable C-square or goodness of it. The two variable C-square test of independence and assumption of C-square. Thank you.